What is going on, Chess YouTube? In today's video, we're having a look at the very exciting gameplay between Gukesh D and Hikaru Nakamura in the 2025 Freestyle Chess Grand Slam tournament that is happening right now. And in this game, Gukesh sacrifices his bishop very early in the game to get the attack going against Hikaru. What more could you ask for? Let's dive right in.
And let's see, how does Gukesh want to begin this game? Well, here the strongest moves according to the engine are D3, F4, A3 and A4. And in the game, Gukesh, he goes F4 in the spirit of the bird's opening. Actually, quite a good move here. And Hikaru Nakamura, he does the exact same thing. F5, clamping down on that F pawn, clamping down on the E4 and the G4 squares. Now, Gukesh, D3 is the move, moving his king's pawn one square forward, potentially intending E4, gaining space in the center of the board. And now Hikaru Nakamura, he goes B6, intending potentially bishop B7 with the fianchetto of that light squared bishop, slicing down this diagonal, but I'm not so sure about that move. All right, now Gukesh, knight to G3 is the move, jumping up with the knight. And very interestingly, the computer said A3 and A4 were the strongest moves, potentially intending a fast A5, trying to capitalize on that fianchetto-based setup of black. Now Hikaru, bishop B7 is the move, very logical, continuing with that fianchetto. And now Gukesh, he does gain space in the center, completing his idea with D3, with the move E4, a very strong move, gaining space. And now we have all this tension with these pawns on E4 and F5. And what is Hikaru going to do about it? Well, he goes F takes E4 immediately. That is the strongest idea, taking that pawn, of course. And normally you would think white would take back with the D pawn or potentially the knight. But instead, Gukesh, he plays a very, very strange looking move in this position. He goes for the attack on the queen side with the move A4 with the alpha 0 pawn. Now, I do want to point out, instead of that, knight takes E4 was the right response. Simply recapturing with the knight, there's nothing wrong with that. It'd be a game white would continue developing. But instead, he goes for the insane move A4 here, gaining space. Crazy stuff. Is he potentially thinking A5 then A6? We'll have to wait and see. All right, Hikaru Nakamura, he goes C5, gaining space on the queen side in the spirit of the Sicilian defense. And now here, Gukesh, he continues his idea of gaining space on the queen side with the move A5. This is just completely insane. I mean, this was not necessary. There were plenty of other ideas. And again, is white intending A takes B6 or the alpha 0 style move A6? Honestly, I'm not sure. We'll have to wait and see. Here, Hikaru says no more messing around. He finally does take on E4. F takes E4 is the move, and now Gukesh simply recaptures with the D pawn. D takes E4. Now here, Hikaru, knight to D6, jumping up with the knight, pressuring that pawn on E4, and now let's count them. We have 1, 2 pieces attacking that pawn versus the 1 piece on G3 defending. That means black is threatening to win that pawn on E4 right away, but of course, Gukesh, he's got some very interesting ideas. Before defending it or going E5, he actually goes bishop to A2. This is one of the benefits of that move A4 than A5 earlier. You free up that A2 square where it can slice across the board and hit the queen. Now here, black goes queen to G7, fianchettoing the queen to get out of the attack. And I do want to point out, for some insane reason here, the computer says actually knight to C4 is the best way to get out of the attack, blocking the attack of the bishop with the knight. Now, personally, that move looks completely insane to me. Instead, queen G7 played in the game. That move looks far more logical. And here, white does go E5, gaining space in the center, driving back that knight. And overall, it does look like white has a very stable advantage so far in this position. All right, here, Hikaru Nakamura, knight to F5 is the move, jumping over with the knight and threatening knight takes G3, trying to damage white's pawn structure on the king side. That would be incredibly annoying. With that in mind here, white does trade on F5. So knight takes F5, played in the game. Then we have G takes F5, and then white gets his bishop on C1 out into the game on the E3 square. Bishop to E3, and now white is officially ready for long castles, whereas king would go to C1 and his rook to the D1 square, just as in classical chess. And now black does the exact same thing. He gets his king ready for castling, and now here both sides do castle long castles, and then long castles. And now it is starting to sort of a little bit resemble a more normal game of chess. Of course, a lot of the pieces are still on insane squares. That is just Typical Freestyle Fridays chess for you. All right, here, knight to f3 played in the game, developing the knight to a decent square. Black goes h6, gaining control of g5 and stopping knight to g5 ideas. Now, here, in this position, Gukesh plays a very aggressive move. This move is completely insane. I mean, if you think you know what the move is, pause the video right now and try to find it. This turns out to be the strongest move in the position. That is your one hint. And it kickstarts a brutal queenside attack against the Black King. And while you're at it, go and smash that YouTube like button for me. It really does help me out a ton. And here, Gukesh, it turns out he goes for it on the queenside with the move bishop takes c5. He's giving up the bishop for 2 pawns, the one on c5 and the one on b6 after b takes and then queen takes. Now, normally, the bishop is worth more than those 2 pawns, but here, of course, that Black King on c8 is just incredibly vulnerable, and Gukesh is going to get a huge attack going on the queen side. All right, queen g6 chosen by Hikaru Nakamura. The idea being the queen now defends along the 6th rank. All of these squares are being guarded by the queen. That may be very important. For example, queen c6 in particular may be a very good idea. But of course, Gukesh, he calculated literally all of this out. He saw into the future. He saw the move queen g6. And here, he had the move ready, e6, blocking the 6th rank. And of course, the bishop on a2 guards that square. Therefore, queen takes e6 is not possible. Now here, you can do 3 things. Number 1, you can do nothing and allow e takes d7. Number 2, you can go d6. Number 3, you can go d takes e6. Either way, the queen is being cut off from the game on g6. That is the entire idea of that move. Now here, Black has a few different decent ideas. The computer says a6, d takes e6, and finally d6 are the best moves for Black. In the game, king to b8 instead was chosen, getting the king away from the pin. Now the bishop on c7 is no longer pinned to the king on the c8 square, as that king is no longer on c8. But here, Gukesh, he spots the flaw with this move. He jumps in with the knight to e5, just continuing the attack. Of course, there were some stronger ideas. I do want to point out here, the move a6 was incredibly strong. Instead, knight to e5 chosen in the game, and Hikaru says that knight on e5 is too strong to be kept alive. He takes it immediately. Bishop takes e5, then queen takes e5, wins back that piece, and then Black simply goes d6, blocking the attack. And now, because White missed the idea of a6 just a couple of moves prior, Hikaru Nakamura has found a way to claw himself back into the game. Now, from here, we have the move queen to b5, sliding over with the queen, once again pinning that bishop on b7 to the king on b8. And now the threat is bishop d5, targeting that pin piece on b7. And what is Black going to do about it? Well, he slides back with the queen to e8, a very good move. Now, of course, there is no time for bishop d5, as then you would immediately lose that queen on the b5 square. Now we have queen to b4, Gukesh dropping back with the queen, maintaining the pin and maintaining the idea of bishop to d5. That would be very strong. And now Black has a couple of ways to get out of that future attack. And one of them, a very good one played by Black, is simply king to a8, sliding out of the pin. Now if White goes bishop d5, Black can simply take that bishop immediately. And beyond that, Black has rook to b8 ideas, which may be very, very useful. Now Gukesh, he's got to continue the attack. He is essentially all in here. He goes a6, giving up that pawn on the a6 square in order to try and open up more lines on the king side. And of course, that pawn cannot be taken at any cost. Here, if you take the pawn, bishop takes a6, then the move for White, it's very simple, bishop d5, and the only way to delay mate is either queen c6 or bishop b7. Either way, you are getting checkmated in short order. So instead of taking the pawn, Hikaru just goes bishop c6, moving up with the bishop. Now we have rook d3 for Gukesh, the rook lift on the 3rd rank, potentially eyeing c3 or b3 with the rook. That is a very aggressive idea, but it turns out this is a very big mistake here. I'm going to give it a question mark, because here, Hikaru Nakamura, he simply goes rook b8, a very strong move, targeting the queen on b4 immediately. And now, as soon as that queen moves, I mean, the attack is going to be virtually totally over for Gukesh. And here Hikaru is going to be up material with the counterattack coming very swiftly. All right, we have queen to a3. The queen slides out of the attack. And again, keep in mind, Hikaru has the extra piece versus the extra 2 pawns of white, and the longer this game goes and the more Gukesh doesn't have an attack, the stronger that extra piece will become. All right, here, Hikaru Nakamura, rook b6 is the move. The rook lift on the 6th rank, potentially setting up ideas like queen to b8, potentially, and also putting pressure on that pawn on a6. Overall, a very good move. Now, Gukesh, rook to c3, finding a better square for the rook and pressuring that bishop on c6. Now, we have bishop to e4, flying down with the bishop, putting some pressure on e4, and of course, that bishop is, number one, very, very safe there, and it's also not being attacked on that c6 square. Therefore, this rook is now free to move wherever it needs to. All right, Gukesh, he continues to try to fight back. He goes bishop c4, but this move turns out to be very, very weak. Instead, there were plenty of other stronger ideas. For example, h3, rook d1, and so on. h4, rook d1, and so on. Instead, bishop c4 played in the game. The idea being the bishop potentially is a little more active on c4. It does defend that pawn on a6, but of course, black is going to have several different ideas here to counterattack. Number one, d5 is very, very strong, driving back that bishop on c4, and the move instead played in the game, knight g6, is also pretty decent, targeting that pawn on the f4 square. Now here, Gukesh, he defends the pawn with the move g3, decent, but again, Hikaru, he simply has the initiative here. Now, in this position, he plays a move that is actually quite strong, but I'm a little bit puzzled by it. He goes king to b8. I mean, to me, the king looked a little bit safer on that a8 square overall, but I guess he's worried about back rank mating ideas, and I guess he wants the king to defend that c8 square instead. Instead of king to b8, the move d5, as usual, was the stronger move, clamping down on that c4 square, driving back that bishop, and potentially threatening the move d4 later in the game. Instead, king b8 was played here, and then we have the move rook d1 for Gukesh, clamping down on that d5 square and capitalizing on potentially the weakness of Hikaru Nakamura's last move. All right, now here, Hikaru, he plays the move queen to c6. Very interesting. The queen is now open to the attack of the rook on c3. For example, if white had a decent discovered attack, that queen would be in a lot of trouble. And it turns out this move, queen c6, overall was a big mistake. I'm giving it 2 question marks. Instead, queen to c8, targeting a6, was the better idea. Instead, on c6, the queen is very, very vulnerable. And now white's going to have several different ways to attack it. And in the game, he finds the best move, simply bishop to e2, a very precise retreat of the bishop, opening up the discovered attack on the queen on c6. Now, what is Hikaru going to do here with the queen? Well, he slides the queen all the way back to the a8 square. Queen to a8 played in the game. This is the best retreat square for the queen. But now, Gukesh, he continues. Rook d4, jumping up with the rook. Instead of this, queen to a4 may have been a little bit stronger, eyeing those weak light squares in the black camp. But instead, rook d4 overall, plenty strong. And now the rook is ready to transfer over onto c4, b4, and so on. What is black going to do in this position? Well, he goes rook c8, getting his other rook into the game perfectly fine. Now we have rook dc4, and we do have the possibility for some trades on that c4 square. But before doing that, Hikaru goes rook c to c6. The point being, if white takes on c6, black can take back with the other rook. And now neither side necessarily wants to trade there. Now here, white has a couple of very, very strong ways to proceed. The first one, the strongest one, is simply rook takes c6, and the point is there's a very key tactical idea. If white did this, he didn't do it in the game. If you go rook takes c6, and for example, if black takes back, then queen to a4 puts a lot of pressure on that rook, and overall, white threatens ideas like queen b5. If it moves, queen to e8 could be very dangerous, and overall, black would be close to busted in this position. Instead, after rook c to c6, queen to a5 played immediately. Now, this move is not nearly as strong as taking on c6 immediately, and here Hikaru does get the chance to trade on c4. That is what he does. Rook takes c4, trading that pair of rooks. This is the stronger move. Now we have rook takes c4, and then queen d5, the queen flying into the game, pressuring the rook on c4 and the queen on the a5 square. Now Gukesh, he keeps the queens alive and that rook. Queen to a4 is the move, and now Hikaru, rook to c6, the only good move, again targeting that rook on the c4 square. Now Now Gukesh, queen b4, hits the king on the b8 square. Black blocks it. Rook to b6 is the move. Now again, we have queen to a4. And here in this position, it's a very, very tense middle game position. But both sides here, they do basically agree to a draw via a threefold repetition with the moves rook c6, queen b3, rook b6, rook c6, queen b3, rook b6, and finally we do have that draw by threefold repetition. So very impressive game by Gukesh D and Hikaru Nakamura in this freestyle chess game.